think since it's been a couple of minutes, we'll go ahead and get started. So hi everyone, and welcome to our 300 level Econ Electives introduction panel. First, thanks for coming, and thank you to our panelists for coming as well. So I'm going to get started by introducing our panelists, and then we'll ask them some questions. But feel free to use the Q&A tab to put in your own questions, and we'll leave some time at the end to ask those as well. So first, I'll introduce Professor Witte. Professor Witte's research deals with applied questions in macroeconomics and public finance. His main interests are in consumption theory and topics in taxation. And a fun fact about Professor Witte, his kids think his Zoom lectures sound simultaneously boring, weird, and hilarious, and his youngest kids love to try and pop up in front of the camera. We also have Professor Savage here with us. His research has been concentrated in urban public transportation and transportation safety. He has published widely on the economics of mass transit finances and regulatory oversight. And a fun fact is that he spends a lot of time walking his 8-month-old black lab, Daisy, along the golf course by the canal. We also have 2 student panelists with us, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves. Radhika, can you go first?
Yeah, hi, I'm Radhika. I'm a 4th year, obviously studying economics, but also psychology and the integrated marketing communication certificate. I'm originally from Naperville, Illinois. And a fun fact about me is that I'm also one of the editors-in-chief of Stitch, Northwestern's fashion magazine. Passing it over to Hamilton.
Hey everyone, I'm Hamilton. I'm studying, of course, economics, but also computer science. I'm a 4th year student, and I'm originally from Portland, Oregon. And my fun fact is that I play Ultimate Frisbee.
Very nice. Thank you guys for your introductions. And now we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to ask my first question to Professor Witte and Professor Savage. I'm sure we have a lot of students who have never taken an econ field class or elective before. So how are those field classes different from the core courses they've probably already taken or are taking currently?
I'll take a stab first. I think there is a step up in intellectual difficulty from the intro courses to the intermediate courses, but I don't really think the field courses are harder than the intermediates. I mean, I think the intermediates are really hard, but I think the field courses expect a larger stock of economic knowledge, intuition, that they expect you to know what we teach in intermediates, the micro, the macro, and the econometrics, and then apply it in ways that are pretty fun. So I'd say that the core courses are a challenge, but I think that to some extent the field courses are kind of a reward for all that hard work.
Awesome.
Yeah, my take on this is that I agree, first of all, everything Professor Witte says, right? But I think the other thing is you start realizing the stuff that you learned in the intermediate courses, 310, 1 and 2, 311 or 281, right? Which can sometimes be somewhat dry. You can see how these things are applied. So I think that's the biggest payoff here, right? And I would say that at least for courses which aren't totally theoretically based, right? We do try to make sure that you get some use of your econometrics, right? Now, of course, I would generally argue that Econ 281 is probably the most useful class you're ever going to take at Northwestern in terms of your future life, right? But I think you actually see that in some of the courses where you'll be interpreting research and maybe get a chance to actually play around with some real data and get some real insights.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for your answers.
I would encourage Hamilton and Radhika to disagree with anything we say based on your experience, because yeah, we just teach them, we don't take them. So yeah, what do you guys think?
I think, sorry, Hamilton.
Go for it.
I think to Professor Witte's point about how they aren't harder than the intermediate course, I think that's definitely true. And honestly, because you get to pick your field courses, so you're probably more interested in it as opposed to a blanket micro or macro class. I think you honestly also have a lot more fun with it because you get to like, especially because we have so many different classes offered and you can really just pick whichever ones that you are actively interested in. I think they're super fun. And so even if they are difficult at times, it's all very worth it.
Yeah, I kind of agree with everything here. Like, I think the intermediate courses give you like the tools, and then like the field courses to give you like how to apply them in different like topics and fields, and it's definitely much more fun than the intermediate courses.
Awesome. I'll kind of throw my next question to Professor Witte and Professor Savage first, and then I'd love for Radhika and Hamilton to also weigh in. So what factors should students maybe be taking into consideration when choosing them? You know, there's so many, so what should they think about first?
You go ahead, Mark.
I don't know, I just think it's interest that, you know, if it's something you're fired up about, grab it. That, I mean, you know, people seem to be pretty excited about behavioral. So, I mean, that, and they're not wrong. You know, if you're interested in environmental things, we have energy, we've got natural resources, we've got environmental. If you like the policy stuff, I mean, there's, you know, labor, there's econ of family, there's public finance, there's education. We also allow people to take like the CESP courses on like income inequality or public policy, or there's a health one. So like, you know, it's what you're excited about. If you're interested in finance, then, you know, taking money in banking or international finance, or taking corporate finance through business institutions or through Kellogg, you know, that those are super useful. And, you know, if you're somebody who likes that, you'll like this.
So my take here is that, you know, so I'm a microeconomist, so I've already talked to sort of the more micro-based courses. But I mean, I do think that you know, to get an economics major, there's only need 6 electives, which, you know, in such a broad-based discipline such as economics, I mean, that's a pretty small sampling. So I do think there are certain courses, shall we say, that offer sort of a core set of knowledge, which I would think any economist should know something about, to be honest. You know, I think something like 309 public finance, I think a basic knowledge of public finance is something any professional economist should know. I think labor economics, again, is something like that. Econ 339. I think Econ 349, industrial organization. I think that is a core piece of knowledge which economists should know. And I think then beyond that, I think it really is, as Professor Witte says, you know, really to do with interest, right? We have quite a wide variety of courses. I think you should be motivated by that. Of course, I'm not an idiot, so I know that, shall we say, the reputation of the instructor has a huge bearing on which classes close out first. So, I mean, and you're the consumers, so you know what you're buying. So I think that's the great advantage, you guys filling in your CTEX, right? It provides consumer information.
Yeah. Following up on Ian there, I do agree that certain courses I think are very foundational in the field, like industrial, like labor, like public finance. And yeah, that those sort of things where other things sort of build on top of that in very useful ways.
Yeah, definitely. Radhika and Hamilton, do you have any registration or pre-reg tips for our students, or what has your experience been like in picking your courses?
For me, what I usually try to do towards like the beginning of like a little bit before registration happens is try to look through the course catalog and see like what courses are offered. I think try to read through all of them so you can like gauge which ones seem interesting and which things, like if you have say like a not as great registration time, thinking about like, oh, I can see like when it's typically offered and picking up for next year, like keeping it in mind, making a plan that like there are some courses that are really interesting and that like you might really want to take, and trying to make sure that like you can plan for that accordingly. Is it offered once a year, twice a year? Which course is offered, and trying to make sure that you can accommodate taking a course that you really want to take.
And Ian, sorry to jump in, Radhika. Ian posts up our plan for the coming year, like before any other department. I think it's really pretty great. If you go to our webpage, it's got the annual and the quarter by quarter. But I'm sorry, Radhika, please.
No, I should say actually, because that came to Hamilton's point that you know, we've started doing the schedule for next year, and our usual goal is that we will publicly post that on the first day of spring quarter. So you'll see that. I mean, obviously, it's still unclear as to whether full registration is going to get pushed back into the summer again, based on why I'm not near the top of the food chain when it comes to hearing what's going on from Central, but I think this is quite likely. So, but that we will see that. But I mean, we also have our past course schedules for the last X number of years on the website as well, so you can gauge frequency of offerings. Because I mean, I do understand that, you know, one thing you learned in 310.2 is a little bit of game theory here and strategic behavior. So, you know, I think pre-registration is the ultimate in strategic behavior.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, all of the econ schedules are always up pretty far in advance, and then closer to pre-reg, other courses that you may be taking will also be released. So I always try to build a couple different mock schedules just in case I don't get into the class I really wanted, like what are other things that can fit in and all of that. And then in terms of also picking courses, like I know this is not how you're supposed to do it, but I also will pick them based on what time of day they are. Like I found that contrary to what you would believe, like 9:30 a.m.s in winter quarter really work for me. So I'll try to schedule things then. But I think like it's important to realize that you might be really into a class, but if it's offered at a time of day where you like know that that's not your time to be in a course, you're not going to get a whole lot out of it. So I guess just keeping that in mind too.
Definitely. And I know prior to this event, we got a lot of questions specifically about professions and other majors that people are interested in. And there's a really handy chart on the Econ website that I'll drop in the chat now that gives you a little bit of an idea of what courses you might take if you're interested in a certain career path. So that'll be in the chat for students. So I'll throw my next question to Radhika and Hamilton. How did some of your econ field course experiences help you in your job search or in other internship experiences you've had?
I can take this first. So one of the courses that really like shaped my view on like postgraduate plans was economics and education. Taking this course, I kind of made me think about like what I want to get out of my education in terms of, do I want to go back for a graduate degree? And like in terms of that kind of stuff. And so that kind of helped me realize like, oh, maybe going back to school isn't for me, and like I would rather go and like work for a little bit and then think about maybe grad school down the line. But like in the moment, I was thinking like it wasn't worth it for me. Thinking about from like more like economic perspective in terms of like what's my marginal gain from going to school now versus later.
I also think it's given me a lot of like deliverables on my resume. Like I know how to do a lot more things in Excel, and I understand a lot more like finance-based numbers than a lot of people who, I want to work in marketing. So like than a lot of other people in marketing, like a lot of people will come from a more creative aspect, but I have a lot of financial background just from my econ field courses, which I think definitely helps me stand out. And then also they just make you sound so smart, like talking to any interviewers, like being able to say that you have an understanding of economics, which is such a lofty idea to so many people, I think definitely helps you stand out and sound like pretty cool and smart, especially if you want to do a less traditional career for an economics major afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. So the next question I'll ask to everybody, but I'll ask Professor Witte and Professor Savage first. What are some things that students can do to get the most out of their field courses? And then also kind of as a follow-up, what can they do, especially in a Zoom environment, in a virtual setting, to get the most they can out of their courses?
So I think Eric Schultz lined it out for me nicely once upon a time about how it's just really important to, on your own initiative with scratch paper, it's old school, draw the important graphs or like derive the important equations. Like, you know, you can look at it all day long, but it's sort of only a surface learning. Whereas if you can do it by hand, and then even better, cover everything up and then do it from memory, then it's going to sink in. Or as you're doing it, something will go wrong. Be like, wait a minute, why is it like this? Or where is this? And then you realize, oops, and then you take it back. And so, you know, it's that again, you can fool yourself into thinking you know things better than you do. And I certainly think I do better in class than teaching if I've taken the time before class to like carefully draw it out by pen and not be cocky about it, because sometimes I'm not as on it as I think I am. The Zoom environment, I don't know, I think office hours actually work pretty well here. That, you know, it's not quite as good for sketching and waving on my hands, but yeah, I think some people really are serious about it. They come in, ask their questions, get out. Other people come and hang out. And I think some people just feel, you know, that they've had enough Zoom in their life and they're not willing to come to office hours. But I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, my view is that you know, whether we were in person or remote, that actually interacting with the faculty in office hours and after class is really added thing. I mean, I think the students who are, you know, students choose how they want to interact with the class, right? This is my observation on it. I think there's real value in talking with the faculty members. They have a lot to add in terms of not only helping you with the material, but just sort of, you know, offhand comments which would extend the material and things like that. So I really would sort of encourage people to do that. I mean, when I get to the end of the quarter and there are certain people who managed to pass through the class without really even entering into my consciousness or talking to me one-on-one, I think that's kind of sad for them, even though I recognize it's their right to do that. My other observation in the sort of remote and Zoom world is that, you know, I see this because, you know, like Professor Witte, I have elementary school age kids, right? So we observe as sort of consumers, kids doing this, what seems to work and what doesn't seem to work, right? And it seems to me that a set schedule for what you're doing, so that my view is that providing you don't have time zone challenges, saying you'll view the lecture later rather than live, I think, well, it's certainly true you can go back and replay the lectures and things like this. This is fine, right? But I think what you're doing from synchronous content is establishing a schedule for you to think about things at certain times of day, right? And I think, you know, it's one of these things that, you know, if I was teaching behavioral economics, we would actually teach as part of this, is a little bit to do with commitment and things like that. So, I mean, that's the other thing I would strongly suggest, right? Of course, I strongly suggest to my 11-year-old daughter as well, right? And see how far it gets me with her as well, right? So.
Yeah, awesome. Hamilton and Radhika, any thoughts?
Honestly, like nothing that hasn't already been said, but econ is like all my econ classes are courses that I always handwrite my notes for. Even if I'm in a more like history-based econ course as I am right now, like I'm not typing it up, I'm handwriting it, just because I feel like that definitely helps me keep everything in mind, and because like graphs and math come up all the time, so that's always super helpful. And then yeah, just get to know your professors and your TAs. I'm a tour guide and I talk about the econ faculty in every single tour and panel I've ever been on, just because they're so incredibly accomplished, but everyone is still so helpful and so kind and always willing to sit down and talk you through whatever you need. And I think that's really, really great and something that we definitely should not take for granted and make use of.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off that again, like talking to professors, like hanging out 5-10 minutes after class when like most people quickly press the leave meeting, but being one of those people who stay back and ask like a few curious questions about how like the class and how the topic applies to like other things going on in the world, like talking about it, talk to them, it's like getting your name, like keep familiar with them will really benefit you in terms of thinking about the topic in a broader context in the class, and also like talking to professor and building some like a relationship with them, because more often not like having this ability to talk to professors like so easily so often is something that like you'll lose once you graduate, and so build that relationship as soon as possible.
Yeah, great answers. So I'll also throw out a reminder to the students who are attending. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A tab, or you can also just chat them to me. The next question I'll ask to Professor Witte and Professor Savage, what has been your favorite 300 level course to teach?
I'm guessing Ian kind of likes economics of transportation, but a lot of people do. And it's sort of interesting. Like I think of, like money and banking is about a field of money and banking, and transportation is about like this sort of very select part of the economy that is all over the place. So, it is just kind of fun to think about how this works into everything. I don't know, we don't typically teach that many upper level courses. I think my favorite is really public finance. So that's kind of what got me into the field in the first place, that I took it as an undergrad, just really love it. And I take lectures from that class and use it now, and I can see that hitting students the way they hit me. And so I kind of like that. I also, I like teaching intro. I mean, it's really fun to meet all these people and expose them to what I think is, a pretty great field for understanding the world. And boy, I really enjoyed teaching 311. It wasn't a class I liked as an undergrad. I kind of didn't like it. But when I got to grad school, I was very interested in microeconomics, but then just the grandeur of macroeconomics, like with, Bob Gordon, sold me on it. And so I've really, really come to like it. And I think the field has matured and just works a lot better than it used to. So I really enjoy teaching that. Ian.
Yeah, so I've taught a variety of courses over time. Taught Econ 310-1, what's now known as Stat 210. I've taught that, and the 300 level electives I've taught 349 and 355, the translation course. I mean, I'm someone who actually, so I do a little bit less teaching than other people because I'm the associate chair of the department, which is why I'm here for this panel today. So I actually schedule the courses, so that's why I'm here. And so I would say that I do like the translation course, but I do like the variety of things, and I like teaching some courses which I know, I don't teach that often because A, it's a bit different, right? And B, I get to learn some things myself now. Obviously, the translation course evolves over time as well, right? But the reason I find that fun to teach, apart from the fact is that it's not only stories about transportation and how, which is almost 20% of the economy, so it's something that's kind of worthwhile knowing something about, right? It isn't just all insights in there. It's actually the fact that we're going to use some of the existing knowledge of economics, and that to me is actually the excitement. Because I don't think I would ever teach a course which was just sort of observations and hand waving, right? It's the fact that along the way you get to learn some serious models and also get to apply models, right? Now, for example, in 310-2, you may on 202 you might learn some oligopoly models, right? I mean, these are kind of interesting to learn from theory, right? A little bit dry. But when you start using them to think about, say, strategic behavior between American Airlines and United Airlines at O'Hare, then it starts becoming a lot more fun and a lot more real. And that's kind of cool to teach.
Yeah.
One time, Ian, you made the point that transportation economics is the whole reason there is a Chicago.
Well, that's right. From an economic history point of view, there's Daniel Cronin's book on why the city in the Midwest ended up being Chicago as opposed to where you're from, Mark, St. Louis, right? Which was, of course, the loser in this whole battle, right? But it could have been Milwaukee, it could have been Cleveland, it could have been Detroit, right? But it ended up being Chicago. And so transportation and land use are a big play together, right?
Yeah, that's great. So kind of on the flip side then to Radhika and Hamilton, what has been your favorite to take?
My favorite econ course I've taken was experimental economics taught by Professor Ogawa. So the class took economic principles and theories like game theory, auction theory, and kind of gamified them. try to take these like topics you would learn in lectures and kind of put them up to display by like playing games that involve these kind of topics. And it's interesting because you can see in person what it's like to like see these kind of theories like happen and what actually holds up and what actually devolves. So I think that's one of my favorite ones.
Mine is probably economics of gender with Professor Sarah Hernandez. I think it's such an interesting look at like the wage gap, the differences you'll see in education, how these things keep persisting, and then like real world examples throughout. I think that's always super cool. Any class with Professor Hernandez, she always does a great job of assigning readings that are interesting and applicable. And I absolutely love her and recommend her to everyone. So economics of gender is definitely like one of my favorite courses at Northwestern in general.
I'll actually say something about Hamilton's comment on 329 experimental, which you might notice is not on the schedule for this year. So the reason for that is that the way it's taught is very dependent on in-person instruction. So the pandemic has really done a number on us offering that particular course. It's probably only one on our schedule that's affected. So I mean, so for those who are juniors, it's definitely going to be on, well, it's going to be on the schedule next year, providing we have in-person instruction at some point next year. So that's
yeah. I thought it was interesting you mentioned those two classes, because those are things that, like, I don't think Ian and I had those options as undergrads. That, you know, we're 20th century economists, but those are both sort of our newer things added to the curriculum, and yeah, both certainly very important and also very sort of empirical and applied. That the sort of theory is, you know, econ still has a theoretical base, but that it's become over time a more applied and more empirically driven field, and so those classes are just classic in that.
Yeah, definitely. I guess that's kind of related to my next question for Professor Witte and Professor Savage. If there was a course looking at the catalog now, which one would you take, or maybe which one sounds the most fun or interesting?
Let me jump on that one. I was trying to respond online, but I think I've lost the question. But somebody's asking about Econ 352, Economics of Networks, which I suspect will be hotter than the sun this spring. It'll be how hot? Behavioral hot. And yeah, so it's taught by a new professor we've just hired. Of course, I blank his first name, but Golub. Ben Golub, yes.
They hired him from Harvard, so it's...
Yeah, so he's excited to teach students who are really serious about learning. And yeah, so it's application of economic and statistical tools to understanding markets involving social or technological networks, such as financial markets, manufacturing, supply chains, labor markets, information markets. And it's a 281, 310-1, 310-2 sort of applied micro class. And yeah, it's just sort of these questions in economics that, I mean, I guess they've always existed. I mean, networks, certainly in economic history and other places, that these are things that, you know, were important, but I think we never appreciated how important it was until, you know, we sort of get to this sort of world of two-sided platforms that we live in now. And so, yeah, so I think that's gonna be one where I would love to take that. The last time I sat in on an undergrad class was Mar Rewan's Economics of Energy, which was also a lot of sort of very new, innovative approaches of industrial organization to the important, you know, some of the most important questions of our day. And boy, I learned a lot there. And so I don't think I'll be able to sit in on 352, but I would love to.
Yeah. So yeah, actually to say something on 352, what's going on here, right? So some people might have observed that Northwestern's been expanding the computer science department and the so-called CS plus X type thing, where they're making joint appointments with other departments, not just economics, and actually generally not economics, right? And so they've made 2 appointments of economists who started in January, Annie Liang from the University of Pennsylvania and Ben Golub from Harvard. And so this is the first of these courses, and there's always a discussion of whether there would ever be some more formalized dual major. Of course, you could dual major now, right? So, but I mean, whether it would be in a more formalized way, and that may eventually come depending on the expansion of computer science there. So this course is taught from computer sciences, and it's an economics of networks in terms of social and those sorts of networks. I mean, obviously, Professor Browdigan would always tell me that transportation is and energy economics in some ways is the economics of networks anyway, right? Power grids and railroads. These are physical networks. So this is not dealing with physical networks per se, even though some of the principles are the same. In terms of courses I would like to sit in on, I think I probably would sit in on, actually I've sat in on a number of Northwestern courses over my time here, right? But there have been things like sociology of the city. So these are these sort of things in other parts of the university that would be complementary to my thinking as an economist. I think the behavioral and experimental, because I think that really is the innovation which has occurred in methodology in our profession compared with when I was a student. So I'm thinking about how we can use that to think about human behavior.
Awesome.
I would also add, anytime I get the chance to listen to Joel Mokyr, I try to take it.
Great. And for Radhika and Hamilton, as seniors, with one more quarter to go, I presume, what is a class that you're really excited to try and pre-register for?
Well, Professor Witte stole my thunder with the economics of networks one. And now I'm concerned I won't get in, even though I have a senior pre-reg time. So you can expect an email from me if I don't get in, Professor Witte. But I think definitely that one. I've been lucky that I've been able to get into pretty much all of the econ courses that I've wanted to take. So for people looking for recommendations, I'm also in Professor Mokyr's class right now on Western European economic history from like the 1800s to the mid 1900s. And I think that's also a super interesting one.
A class I'm trying to get in, I've been trying to get in, is behavioral economics. Since I came to college, I was always interested in the podcast Freakonomics, which is like revolving around behavioral economics, and I like on a whim bought a book once. I thought it was so cool. But I've been trying to get in class for 2 years, and hopefully this last quarter is the one.
Definitely. Awesome. So I'll also ask this to Professor Witte and Professor Savage, kind of, I think Professor Savage alluded to it a little bit. I have gotten a lot of questions from first years who are wanting to double major. Are there courses in other departments that you think are really complementary to some of the econ field courses, or that you would really recommend in tandem with any of them?
Mm-hmm.
One thing I would say, we've occasionally taken, graduation records and seeing who joint majors are. The thing that strikes me is just what the diversity of things that people dual major with economics in. It's just amazing. I mean, my answer here probably would be, this is partly because while I'm interested in research point of view. I mean, I think, if you're a transportation person, transportation exists in a social situation, right? So I think, in the cities we live in, which transportation is all interwoven with, comes from there. So I think understanding sort of some sort of sociological way of thinking about things is important, right? I mean, I think, we look at the things we double major with. Psychology is obviously a huge one. I think, in some ways, to the extent economics deals with the matters of choice, and by choosing, people don't necessarily just working totally on a rational basis. They're perceiving this and that attributes when making a decision, and they might make quote mistakes. I'm not sure if they're actually technically mistakes, but based on what information they have. So I think psych's important. I think, to be honest, I think there's, for anyone who's interested in the political end of things, economics and economists are sorts of people who think they actually have a contribution to almost everything in terms of fields, right? Probably mistakenly, right? But I think that things such as political sense. What economists bring to the world, in my opinion, going anywhere else, is two things, right? One, we have game theory, which I think for any interaction gives you an unbelievable sorts of insights, right? And secondly, even though, places like statistics have this as well, I think econometrics and data skills, that's the other thing economists bring. So, I mean, there's lots of fields economists are active in where you might say, hey, the economics content's a little bit skimpy here, right? But our skills in dealing with data tend to be pretty impressive.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm excited about the progress that's being made in developing the data science major, minor, and then yeah, certainly CS is a field that's getting more and more intertwined with economics. And I don't know, I do think like social policies got a lot to add. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things about sort of, beyond just the, the theoretical and empirical side of what we do in, say, our public finance classes, but there's sort of broad social equity issues that I think they touch on very well. Anyway, I mean, going back to Ian's point, yeah, we got people from all kinds of majors in economics, and it's really fun what they add.
Yeah, for sure. And I know Radhika and Hamilton, you both mentioned you're in other majors as well. How has your experience been double majoring? Yeah, what is econ brought to maybe your other areas of study?
I think there's been a lot of overlap. I'm just to mention again, like studying psychology and also the IMC certificate. And so Professor Savage already said it, like there's a lot of overlap with psychology just in terms of the decision-making process and the like whole idea of dealing with choices. But in general, I think there is a lot more econ that shows up than you'd expect. And I think it also helps you have like a certain leg up in some courses sometimes, like for my psych class right now, like I'm in decision making and we're talking about sunk costs, which I talked about 3 years ago in econ. And so it's like something that I already kind of have a deeper understanding of. So I think that's been super helpful. But I don't think there's a single person at Northwestern I've spoken to where they've mentioned something that they're learning in a different major, a different course that I haven't been able to be like, oh, we like kind of touched upon this in economics. So again, to Professor Savage's point of we like to think we're everywhere. I think especially at Northwestern, especially with how big the econ major is, we kind of are present in just about every course.
For me, I'm also majoring in computer science, so the other popular double major combo. And so there's econ provides kind of a more like qualitative approach to like my learning here at Northwestern, because I've gotten a lot of all of like the like theories like from like the intro econ classes and also a lot of like computer science classes. But things like when I took a class, when I took econ of education, it focused a lot more on the policy aspect of it and how to, like Professor Witte said, like make equitable decisions. Like that made me think more rather than from like a numbers perspective, but like having to think from a more broad perspective, think more about the people involved rather than just like binary numbers. And so econ like gave me a more well-rounded education, and I'm really appreciative of that.
Awesome.
I like to think economics works well with other majors, although I'm amazed that anybody can pull off computer science and anything else. I mean, I think that is such a demanding major, whereas I like to think like psychology and economics that we have a lot of flexibility built in to work around what other challenges one has. And I think that extends to study abroad, which I think both these majors make work very well with, going abroad for a term or a year or a summer, whereas CS, boy, you really have to be careful with your planning there.
For sure. Awesome. So I think that's bringing us to the end of my questions, but I'd also, again, like to see if there are any questions from the audience. Go ahead and throw those in the Q&A section. And we can also maybe talk a little bit about Prereg now, which is starting next week. Professor Witte, if you had anything to say about that.
Well, we're not always good at predicting what demand's going to be, which is embarrassing for us as economists, but that this past, well, since last spring, we've kind of been hit by supply and demand shocks that, with I think the shutdown of study abroad and with CFS not being as interesting as it would be in a normal term, where we're not actually in the presence of the workplace. I think we've had higher demand, then we've lost some people from just people moving around and losing some adjuncts. And so that restricted what we were able to offer, like the number of seats. And so that resulted in a lot of classes closing out, which I think, well, it's been pretty aggravating. And at some level, it sorts out. I mean, that people sign up for a couple classes and they end up dropping one, or, that hopefully everybody can get what they need, or can make some progress on their major. But it is the source of some concern for us, because we don't exactly know what spring quarter registration is going to be like.
Yeah, let me say a bit about that. I mean, it's as the person who actually deals with this side of things, right? That certainly decisions were made with the Dean's office to restrict the number of adjuncts this year, which pulled back the number of courses. And I would say, though, that across the 3 quarters, spring quarter has the most offerings. And actually, as I was, it's interesting because at the moment my head's full of next year's teaching schedule at the moment, and my matrix working on that. So this was something which was done, 12 months ago. We're looking at the list of offerings. I think actually we've got a pretty extensive list of offerings with some really very attractive faculty members teaching these courses next quarter. I didn't mean it in that sense, Mark, but intellectually attractive, right? And so I think there's a pretty good set of things. I would say that typically with pre-registration, we went back into having pre-registration about 5 or 6 years ago, and after a period where we didn't use pre-registration, and I think that allowed majors to at least get 1 or 2 courses of the ones they wanted. So, and I would say that we track what goes on in real time as we get closer and closer in the wait list and things like this. So I think that we are things do clear. One thing I've noticed is that in this virtual environment, we do actually seem to get less drops than we used to in the in-person environment after the quarter starts. So you have to be a bit more conservative at the beginning because you're not going to get so many drops during the quarter. And so usually last spring was just bizarre in terms of excess registrations, right, when it went to a no grading circumstance, right? But most of the time we actually have it's pretty consistent from year to year what happens each quarter time. So I feel reasonably okay on this. One thing I would just say to everyone is that people say to us, hey, in a virtual environment where you don't have sort of physical limitations of classroom size, why don't you just make the classes larger? Well, I mean, that's one thing we learn as economists is the issue of externalities. And I always feel that, if you went from 65 cap to 80 or 90, well, the 80th or 90th person may feel good about being there, but just the sheer numbers, I mean, what the finite fixed resource here is the actual time of the instructor and the TA. So I think we're very resistant in just pushing up the caps and just seeing what happens, right? Because I think that leads to a diminution of average quality of instruction received. So I think we're pretty strong about not wanting to deviate there.
For sure, yeah, and we've gotten some great pre-reg advice from Hamilton and Radhika as well, so definitely be sure to start looking at those course catalogs and planning your mock schedules. And just as another note as well, you do need to be officially an econ major to participate in pre-registration. So if you need more information about that, definitely visit the econ website, or feel free to drop any questions now if you have questions about that. So I think that's bringing us towards the end of our panel here. Are there any closing thoughts tidbits of advice that any of our panelists would like to give. And if not, I want to give a huge thank you to our panelists, Professor Savage, Professor Witte, Radhika, Hamilton. Thank you so much for all your information and advice. I hope it's been helpful to our students. I'm sure it has been. And thank you to everyone who came out and attended today. I hope everyone has a great week and good luck with pre-registration. Yeah.